Do you have continuity or association plan for your business?
Has anyone shared the concept of sustainability with you?
What about the need to protect the rights of minority shareholders?
What are those ingredients germane to having effective meetings?
For these and many more, tune into Corporate Governance Platform every Thursday on MITV, your darling station, on DSTV 255 and UHF 43 at 4:30 p.m.
Corporate Governance Platform is your best medium for informative and educative strategies for the practice of the corporate governance profession.
Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, ICSAN, the hub of governance professionals.
Hello, and thanks for joining Corporate Governance Platform. The program, as usual, is proudly brought to you by the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, ICSAN, the hub of governance professionals. And we are transmitting live from MITV Lagos. The focus of our discussion this evening is going to be on the roles and functions of company secretaries in corporate governance. You know, in the past we have dealt with the roles of the non-executive directors in corporate governance, the roles of executive directors, and I think it's appropriate to also bring to you the roles of company secretaries in corporate governance. And to lead in the conversation is a very distinguished member of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, Mrs. AFOLAKE LAWAL. Mrs. AFOLAKE LAWAL is the founder and managing partner of Imperial Law Office. Our core focus is on corporate matters with a bias for corporate governance, commercial law practice, mergers and acquisition, corporate restructuring, corporate finance, amongst others. She has over 25 years experience advising and growing global companies with significant operating scale and complexities. Mrs. Lawal is the co-founder of GTI Group, a foremost investment, banking, and financial services group of companies in Nigeria. And prior to founding Imperial Law, she was the Director of Business Development and Strategy at GTI Capital Limited, where she led the organization's global business strategy across Africa and Western Europe. Her ingenuity in corporate finance and business strategy has been invaluable in attaining often required balance between law and exigencies of business in meeting clients' needs. Mrs. AFOLAKE LAWAL is a Securities and Exchange License Advisor and a member of the Institute of Directors, Nigerian Bar Association, Women Corporate Directors, Nigerian Chapter, Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, ICSAN, amongst others. Mrs. AFOLAKE LAWAL is a barrister and solicitor of the Supreme Court of Nigeria and an alumnus of the Harvard Business School. She also holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife, a Bachelor of Laws degree from the Anglia Ruskin University, Cambridge, United Kingdom, a Master's degree in International Law and Diplomacy from the University of Lagos, and also a Master's degree in Corporate Governance and Finance from the Liverpool John Moores University, United Kingdom. Mrs. Lawal, it's nice to have you on Corporate Governance Platform.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thanks you for accepting our invitation. We are going to be having a conversation on the roles of company secretaries in corporate governance. I'd like to start by asking you, what roles do company secretary normally play in an organization?
Thank you for that question. Corporate governance is something that I have a lot of passion for, and I like the perspective from which we are taking it, which is from the role of the company secretary.
Okay.
This company secretary is usually the first to know of any critical issue in any organization. The company secretary is regarded as the officer of the company. And why is that so? Just like any other director on the board, the company secretary is regarded as an officer. And this is because of the enormous responsibility that the company secretary performs for an organization. Going back to your question, I want to look at it from three perspectives. One, responsibility, that is the role of the company secretary. Responsibility to the board, responsibility to the company, and responsibility to the shareholders. Now, looking at the responsibility to the board, the company secretary organizes the board. The company secretary is there to advise, to guide the board so that the board operates within the ambit of law. The company secretary organizes meetings and makes sure that minutes of meetings are properly documented. The company secretary is responsible for preparing the board plan and the agenda of meetings. The company secretary has a lot of role to play, and that is why it is usually said that the test of corporate governance of a company rests solely with the company secretary. And there are other functions that the company secretary plays. The company secretary is responsible for making sure that the vital issues, the vital policies concerning a company are in place. Each policies such as a whistleblowing policy, ethical responsibility of the company, all of these and much more is bestowed on the company secretary.
Wonderful. What a very robust role performed by the company secretary there. I like the fact that you said he has a responsibility to the board, the company has a responsibility to the company, and of course to the shareholders.
Yes.
Now, in specific terms, what role do Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance of 2018 stipulates for company secretary?
Well, the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance 2018 stipulates some role. The company secretary is responsible for guiding the directors towards their responsibilities in the company. And part of what I said earlier is that the company secretary is usually the intermediary between management and the board. Okay. The company secretary liaises with the chairman of the company and the MD to prepare the board plan and the agenda for the year. The company secretary is responsible for the induction and training of members, of directors. The company secretary is also responsible for onboarding new directors to settle into their role as directors of the company. The company secretary organizes seminars, training, and special programs for directors of the company. And more importantly, the company secretary must make sure that he or she documents the meetings of the meeting appropriately. And I use the word appropriately because it is not just about documenting, it is about doing it appropriately.
Wonderful.
Thank
so that means without the company secretary, there can't be any board meeting anyway.
That is true.
Of course. Okay, why is it that the company secretary is often referred to as the sounding board of corporate governance?
Okay, that's a very good question, and thank you for asking. If you look at all we have been saying, a lot of responsibility, enormous responsibility is bestowed on the company secretary of an organization. The board of any company has a strategy. They formulate the strategy and direct the plan, the action plan of the company. And the onus lies on the company secretary to guide the board in this role. That is, to make sure that they operate within the ambit of the law. Okay. Even while you're having meetings, the company secretary is there to guide and to make sure that, the board is on the right path. I look at the role of the company secretary as being a sounding board from two perspectives, conformance and compliance. Conformance to the extent that the company secretary must make sure that the board conforms with what is expected of it as a board, conform with all the regulatory requirements, and compliance to the extent that they do not run foul of any obligatory responsibility. So that is why. And then, very importantly, the company secretary should be there to direct the board and call the board's attention to any attempt of trying to move away from what is expected of it to be done. So the company secretary is usually referred to as the hand holder in a company. He holds the board and cautions the board should there be any anomaly in which he or she has noticed in the running of the company.
Okay, I like two words that you use there, conformance and compliance. Okay, yeah. That is interesting.
Yeah.
Let me give opportunities to our viewers to be part of this show. We are discussing the roles of company secretaries in corporate governance. I'm Dr. Tunde Odeyemi, and we have here in the studio, doing justice to that topic, Mrs. AFOLAKE LAWAL, a distinguished member of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, and of course the founder of Imperial Law. And if you want to be part of this show, by either asking questions or making comments, please send your text message to 080-2323-1287. I'll take that again, 080-2323-1287. We are discussing the roles and functions of company secretaries in an organization. Okay, you have elaborated so much on the roles performed by company secretary, but we are not done with it yet.
Okay.
The roles of company secretary at times is being categorized into functional and administrative roles. Now, I would like our viewers to know, what do we mean by functional roles and the administrative roles of a company secretary?
Thank you for that question. The functional role of the company secretary, don't forget I had said earlier that the company secretary is responsible for organizing and making sure that the board performs optimally. So the functional role of the company secretary is as regards the board, to make sure that directors are properly tutored towards their responsibility, to organize training for directors, to make sure that training is on for directors and onboarding of directors, to make sure that minutes are adequately collated, to make sure that the board is, timely notice is sent to board members for meetings. So the company secretary is there. That's the functional responsibility of the company secretary to the board, to make sure that the board is in good shape, and to liaise between the MD and the management, and also between the chairman and other directors. So the company secretary invariably ensures free flow of information and ensures smooth communication with on the board. That's the functional responsibility. Okay. So that takes me to the administrative responsibility. The company secretary wears dual hats. Don't forget, the company secretary is also a management staff. So the company secretary performs that role to management. The day-to-day running of the company lies with the company secretary, to the extent that they operate within the ambit of their responsibility, to make sure that the company does not default in its obligation to whether stakeholders or regulators, to also make sure that minutes of meetings internally is properly documented, and to also make sure that everything that is done in the company is within what is expected of it to do according to the laws. So basically, the company secretary has two responsibilities, one to management and the other to the board.
Wonderful roles performed by the company secretary out there. Now, the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance of 2018 also stipulates that whoever that should be a company secretary should have relevant qualifications and competence to be able to effectively carry out his or her duties. Now, what are these qualifications? Okay,
thank you. The company secretary, to perform the role of the company secretary, the first I would say is to be a member of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries of Nigeria, a legal practitioner as so defined by the Act, an accountant as so also defined by the Act. Okay. And anyone who has performed this role for up to 3 years preceding, up to 5 years, 3 years preceding when he is to be onboarded as a company secretary. So basically, those are the qualification for anyone that wants to be a company secretary.
Okay, let's get it right, because of some of our viewers that would like to become a company secretary. Okay. We have so much talked about the company secretary that I'm sure many people out there wants to become a company secretary. Okay. You said number one, it should be a member of ICSAN.
ICSAN, yes.
ICSAN.
Institute of Chartered Secretaries
and Administrators of Nigeria. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. What are the other things that you mentioned?
A legal practitioner.
A legal practitioner can be a company secretary.
Yes.
Okay.
A chartered accountant.
A chartered accountant can be a
Company secretary, yes. Or someone who has performed that role for 5 years, 3 years of which is preceding when he is to be onboarded as a company secretary, who has performed the role of a company secretary. You are not one of these, but you have performed that role for up to 5 years.
Okay, somebody is watching us now.
Or a firm.
Okay, somebody is watching us, and that person has not performed the role for 5 years. He's not a lawyer, he's not an accountant, and neither is the person a member of ICSAN. What advice do you give such a person in order to become an effective company secretary? What do you want the person to do?
Yes, I'll advise the person to register with the Institute of Chartered Secretaries of Nigeria. They have a robust curriculum which takes care of everything and would be able to deliver on what is expected to the person, what is expected to perform that role of a company secretary optimally.
Okay, so if you want to become a company secretary, please go to ICSAN website and register. Now, let's go back to the code.
Okay.
The code also stipulates that the appointment and removal of a company secretary in an organization should be a matter for the board.
Yeah.
Why is it a matter for the board and not a matter for the management?
Okay, looking at what we have been discussing so far, we can see that a lot of responsibility is placed on the company secretary. So this is there to guard against arbitrariness of anyone, either a director or the MD of the company. So why this is there is that the company secretary of the company needs a lot of stability. He is the sounding, yes, of the company. And so the code would want to ensure that it is not just at the whims and caprices of anyone to remove the company secretary at any point in time. So it ensures stability within the company. And I think I'm very, very comfortable with that aspect. There are procedures for removing a company secretary. And those procedures should be glaring for all to see. And then the company secretary is not conflicted. To guard against the company secretary from being conflicted, and that you do not owe anybody, just like all directors. Your duty is to the company and not to anyone.
Wonderful. Now, what advice will you give to a company secretary that is working with a difficult chairman who is always dominant and will not allow for contrary opinion? You have talked a lot about the roles and responsibilities of company secretary to the board. Now, we have a chairman that is dominant. I will not allow a contrary opinion. There's also a company secretary watching us now. What advice will you give to that company secretary on how to handle such situation?
Okay, thank you for that question. I would want to start by saying that first and foremost, the company secretary, I'm sure there are various charters in the organization, and part of those charters would have highlighted how some issues are resolved. Having said that, the company secretary must be someone that is very matured. And when I say matured, I'm not talking about age. To perform optimally as a company secretary, you need to be matured, and you need to be a good leader. This is where training and retraining comes on. The company secretary is usually very quiet at board meetings, and that is so, except you are requested to give an information. So dealing with a difficult chairman has to be something that is done off the board meeting. It's something that you now have to explore your managerial and leadership qualities to be able to do. And in doing that, you would also take note of the fact that everything should be done in a way that you are not the boat of the company is not affected. So training is very important, leadership quality, and I'm sure the company secretary will be fine if she's able to be diplomatic in handling issues.
Somebody just asked a question. I really asked that question. So, that's a very good question. However, what should the company secretary do if the company secretary and if the chairman and the managing director are at loggerheads? That's a question from one of our viewers, Dele Ojo.
So if the chairman and the managing director are loggerheads, I don't think that is I don't think that is a role for the company secretary alone to handle. If the company secretary and chairman are at loggerheads, then it is the responsibility of all other directors, including the company secretary, because that is not what she can handle. So this is the responsibility of the other directors to make sure that things go on in the organization. And that was why I talked about the code. That was why I talked about corporate governance code, corporate governance framework. A lot of companies do not have corporate governance framework. Corporate governance framework details everything that goes on in an organization and how it should be resolved. So what are the mechanisms that you have in your organization? You would have preempted. So for any organization, there are organizations that we have been able to develop corporate governance framework for. It is like the Bible of an organization, and all such disputes, there are mechanisms in which they can be resolved.
Okay, let's talk about ICSAN.
Okay.
Would you say that ICSAN training programs empower company secretaries to discharge their duties effectively?
Oh, brilliant! That's absolutely correct. I'm a member of the institute, and so the curriculum of the institute is very robust. Very robust, that if you have passed through that institute, you can be rest assured that you will perform your role as a secretary optimally. And apart from passing through the institute, there are various trainings, programs. You know, there's opportunity for you to keep improving yourself. So, I mean, without doubt, the institute is something that anyone, whether you are a company secretary now, or you inspire to be a company secretary, I would recommend that Institute of Chartered Secretaries is something that you should is a place that you should be a part of.
Okay, it empowers company secretaries to actually perform professionally.
Oh yes,
okay.
Yes, it does.
Okay, talking about the roles of company secretary again, I want to ask if company secretary actually have specific roles to play in whistleblowing.
Yes, company secretaries have a role to play in whistleblowing. Don't forget, it is a requirement that it should be in place in a company. And the company secretary would make sure that every member of staff is comfortable. And when I say comfortable, what I mean is that what kind of protection do you have for the whistleblower? What kind of protection do you have for the whistleblower? And is it even in place in an organization? Because as we are speaking now, there are some organizations that do not have the whistleblowing policy. So in essence, and that is why you're talking of the functionality of the company secretary. The company secretary should make sure that every company he or she is on has a whistleblowing policy and puts in the parameters that will ensure that the whistleblowing policy is what it should be in an organization. Because there are other companies that have this policy in place, but they just would not, because they have seen that it is not properly done.
Okay.
So it is the role of the company secretary to actually make sure that it is in place.
Okay, you talked about the fact that some companies don't really even have the whistleblowing policy.
Yeah.
Can the some company secretary champion the making or the designing of the whistleblowing policy for the organization?
Well, the whistleblowing policy for an organization, every company has its own mechanism of designing that. Every company has its own mechanism of designing that. That responsibility will not be solely left for the company secretary to do. No, that would not be company. It would not be.
But the company secretary can be involved.
Yes, the company secretary definitely will be involved, and the company secretary will make sure that it operates within the ambit of the law, and all the parameters for protection of the whistleblower, everything is in place.
Okay. Would you also suggest that Nigeria should emulate countries such as India, where it's only the chartered secretaries can practice as company secretary. Would you suggest that we emulate such a country?
Without prejudice to the other professional bodies, I think, in my opinion, it would be a good thing if it is done. And why I said so is because like I've said earlier, the curriculum of the Institute of Chartered Secretary is tailored towards empowering secretaries. It's tailored towards constant training and retraining of secretaries. So I believe that if we emulate India in that aspect, that only chartered secretary, but it is not something that we can do almost immediately. Okay. It's not something that can be done immediately. What I will advise really is that, are there other professionals practicing as company secretaries? They could go ahead to be part of the institute to add to their knowledge. Nobody has a monopoly of knowledge, but I can, and I'm saying it, that being a part of the institute will definitely aid one's performance as a secretary of an organization. Okay,
being a chartered secretary will aid one's performance as the company secretary of an organization.
Because that is what the curriculum is tailored towards. Okay. And apart from the fact that even if you pass through the walls of the institute, there is constant training.
Okay. Which the institute provides.
Which the institute provides.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay,
wonderful. You have been a company secretary for a long time, and I'm sure Imperial Law, which you are a managing partner, also carry out these duties for organizations. What is your final advice to every other person watching us, company secretaries watching us at this moment?
Okay, my advice for anyone that wants to be a company secretary, right?
And the company secretary, those that are also practicing company secretarial.
You know, I usually tell, I sit on the board of a few companies, and I usually advise company secretaries that your board is as organized as you are. Your board is as competent as you are. So what I will advise company secretaries is that you need to be a step ahead. Any company that is, perhaps you're a company secretary in an aviation industry, the whole of the Aviation Act is something that you should be abreast of. So what I will tell the company secretary now is that the ability to organize yourself, to get yourself trained and retrained, and be abreast with all the sectorial laws as it affects your industry, the industry which you operate, then it's a no-brainer that you perform optimally. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, Mrs. AFOLAKE LAWAL, Managing Partner, Imperial Law, and of course a very distinguished member of ICSAN. Thank you for coming to share your views on the roles and functions of company secretary in an organization. And for our viewers out there, we'd like to say thank you for being part of the show. And on behalf of my producer, Adegboye Galabiro, and the technical director, David Adepoju, and of course the camera crew, I'd like to say thank you for watching. I remain your host, Tunde Odeyemi. See you next week.
Do you have continuity or association plan for your business?
Has anyone shared the concept of sustainability with you?
What about the need to protect the rights of minority shareholders?
What are those ingredients germane to having effective meetings?
For these and many more, tune into Corporate Governance Platform every Thursday on MITV, your darling station, on DSTV 255 and UHF 43 at 4:30 p.m.
Corporate Governance Platform is your best medium for informative and educative strategies for the practice of the corporate governance profession.
Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, ICSAN, the hub of governance professionals.